Hello again and welcome back! What you're currently watching is real-time note input into Sibelius. Now, the reason that an input speed like this is even possible is because of keyboard shortcuts, otherwise known as hotkeys. Hotkeys are the key to using Sibelius fluently. We all know that music notation is complex and requires a vast range of completely different symbols. However, it would be unfathomably time-consuming if we had to select each individual symbol from a menu every time that we required it. Hotkeys allow us to keep the symbols that we require the most at the tips of our fingers. So in this lesson, we're going to be starting a little journey on hotkeys, and in particular, we're going to be looking at using hotkeys for our note input. So, let's begin. Sibelius has tried its hardest to make note input as logical and accessible as possible. And this is the reason that we have a keypad window always floating around on our screen somewhere. For those who are not yet aware, the symbols shown on the keypad window correspond to the numbers on a typical keyboard keypad. For example, if I hit the number 5 on my keypad, I'll be selecting the half note duration. And so when I dance my fingers around on my keypad, you'll see everything lighting up. If your keyboard doesn't have a keypad, I suggest looking at the later lesson on customizing hotkeys. Now, what many people aren't as aware of is how to switch easily between the different keypad tabs. One shortcut is to hit the plus key on your keypad if you have one, and this should scroll you through the tabs one by one. But a more controlled way is to use F7 through to F12. So I'm now going to hit F7, and then F8, F9, F10, F11, and F12. And you'll see that when I do that, my options in the keypad window change. So, by combining our keyboard keypad with F7 to F12, all of our input symbols are never further than 2 keystrokes away. Now, before we address any more input hotkeys, there's something important that we first have to think about. In Sibelius, as you should know, when the cursor is blue or highlighted, it means that it's active and ready to insert something into the score. However, it's always important for your workflow that you can quickly deactivate your cursor so that you can select objects in the score instead of adding them. And there are several ways of doing this. The most simplistic way is to click the Select None symbol on the keypad. However, this can be a bit slow, and a much better way is to use the right and left arrows on your keyboard. A quick tap right or left will quickly deselect the mouse. But hitting Escape will also deselect it. I know that some people use the key N to deselect, but I personally like to keep N free for something else. So moving on, arguably the most useful hotkeys in the entire program are the hotkeys connected to individual notes. You'll notice that Sibelius has linked the 7 different note names, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, to their corresponding keyboard keys. And so, if I type A, B, C, D, E, F, G on my keyboard, they all appear as notes on the staff. And so in this way, within a second, I can create, for example, a C major scale. What Sibelius has also done is allow us to use the backspace key to undo any accidents we might make during note input. This is an excellent idea because it's so intuitive to the way in which we would normally type on a computer. So, when we combine the hotkeys for the note names together with the keypad, there are now many commonplace things that we can do without having to touch the mouse at all. The difficult and perhaps more confusing aspect of this is that we have to build up the different parameters of the note first using our hotkeys before we add it to the score. So what do I mean by this? Let's say, for example, that I require a tenuto, dotted half note, G sharp. I first have to select where in the score I would like to have it. And then, before I press the key G, I first have to enter the other parameters of my note into the program. So on my keypad, I would first press the minus sign for tenuto, then the number 8 for my sharp, then the number 5 for my minim, and finally the full stop or delete button for my dotted rhythm. And you can now see that everything is selected, so when I press the G key, there it is, our tenuto dotted half note G sharp. The order that you add the different parameters is flexible. I could have first added the rhythm, then the articulation. It doesn't matter, as long as the note name comes last. Now, I will admit, this is quite a complex procedure just for one note, and so I would like to make it just a little bit easier for you by allowing you to leave out the articulation. Even though we can add articulation and even slurs as we go, I've often found that having to add in just that one extra parameter often gives me a brain freeze and slows me down unnecessarily. And so what I would advise you to do is to force yourself, and I mean really force yourself, to use hotkeys to enter in the pitches and rhythms, and then to go over a passage again afterwards and add things such as articulations, dynamics, etc. And with the aid of hotkeys, this secondary process should actually be quite quick. Using the arrow keys, we should be able to jump from note to note and press our hotkey when we need a particular articulation. One thing that we haven't yet discussed is how to reach different octaves. When we input notes via the keyboard, Sibelius will always enter the pitch closest to the previous pitch. If we want the note to appear in a different octave, we can hold down Control and use the up and down arrows, and this can be done directly after we have entered our pitch. So, let's say I enter in an A sharp dotted quarter note and am then disappointed that it's an octave too low. I simply hold down Control and press the up arrow. Now, I know that if you're hearing all of this information for the first time, it might seem a bit overwhelming. It probably seems like a lot of work to use this sort of input system, but it's definitely worthwhile practicing and definitely worthwhile forcing yourself to get used to, simply because the payoffs are so high. Now, if you've ever learned to use a foreign keyboard, you'll probably know what this is like. At first, it's a bit painful and frustrating trying to find the symbols you're looking for, but eventually your brain goes click, your muscle memory takes over, and then you hardly have to think about what you're typing anymore. As I mentioned earlier, working with hotkeys really is the biggest secret to becoming quick with Sibelius, and this is the reason why so many of our lessons in this tutorial are dedicated to showing you Sibelius's most crucial keyboard shortcuts. And so I would suggest that if you're working through this tutorial, spend the majority of your time just going over, learning, reviewing, and then practicing the hotkeys that I'll be showing you over the next few lessons.